Hello! You've joined the Women of Dear Whimsy, and we meet each week at this show called Between Us Girls. DearWhimsy.com is a community of gifted and creative women. Some of us are entrepreneurs, some are stay-home moms, some are college girls, some are olders and elders and people that we respect and admire. But we come together to share the adventure of living life gifted and as high creative women. This week we're going to be talking about that middle ground, the one between all or nothing. We know there's a perspective for gifted and creative women to be all into the passion of something or absolutely not dealing with it at all. So many times, gifted thinkers can be deeply involved in whatever the topic is that they're involved with at that moment. But that doesn't make for very easy life patterns for the other parts of our life to get done. So today I've asked many of our writers and many of our panelists to come in. We have 7 different voices coming to talk about how they battle the all or nothing place and find middle ground for a peaceful life that still engages, emerges, and experiences their giftedness and the things they're passionate about. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
All right, this morning we're going to begin with Dr. Edith, who's going to share with us about how it works for multi-intelligent people and how this immersion of all or nothing process happens and what she sees in her practice and what that looks like for those of us who are adults or parents or employees or entrepreneurs when we're facing the gifted parts of being an all or nothing thinker and how it shows up in our world. Good morning, Dr. Edith.
Well, good morning, sweetie. It's so great to be here. Hey, listen, when we're working, doing anything, whether it's schooling, whether it's just communicating and interacting with others, our all or nothing is very intense. And what do I see when I look at my clients? I'm looking at the fact that they don't even recognize sometimes that it's all or nothing. They're looking at, well, they're going all at it. What's the problem here? Well, why can't I be at it? Or I'm doing it all and I'm thoroughly exhausted. And I believe we've had some conversation about the physical feeling we have with that too this week among ourselves. And it's real. Our bodies, that exhaustion comes there for that all or nothing because we're all in or we withdraw completely many times just to be who we are. When we're looking at tasks, when we're looking at things to get done, that all or nothing comes into the fact that we should get it easily, be able to do it quickly, have it completely finished perfectly, or we're not going to do it at all. And so it's really important that we realize that there are other pathways. We have other choices and other options. And so one of the things I like to work with is people looking at what are their options, have them list them. What are the different scenarios that you could explore? Maybe they aren't the best ones for you, or maybe you haven't thought in those terms, that there are more than one path, there are more than one options for completing a task, beginning a task, for expressing yourself so that it doesn't have to be an all or nothing expression emotionally, physically, or in the task you're doing. So by looking at options and just having that awareness and then taking that deep breath so that you can say, oh, I have a choice. I have a choice. Excellence is what I'm trying to achieve. Steps toward the pathway of mastery, not destination, is all part of it so that we don't have to have all or nothing and that we can take the middle ground and or experience those options. Not be mediocre. Now, we can still have high standards, but we do have options and we can pursue them, whether it be emotionally, in something we're doing, interacting with others, or just being who we are in our expression.
Oh, I love that explanation. There's so many facets to how to deal with gifted behaviors. And our actions often really affect all areas of our life because there's the personal production of how we like to engage with things. I personally love calligraphy. I've been studying it since I was 7 years old. And so I can get lost in a calligraphy conversation that goes so deep and so far that people who are not exposed to calligraphy would be quickly overwhelmed by it. And so I know as an educator, I know as someone who wants to be socially part of the conversation, I don't want to take my depth of knowledge there to a place where I isolate myself because no one wants to hear all that mess. And likewise, we see that with young children in the classroom. Gifted thinkers often get very transfixed on something they're interested in, particularly if it requires them to use the part of their brain that they're excited about, creativity or critical thinking or expressionate arts and drama. If it's using the place where their gifts are naturally occurring, often you can just love that endorphins that come from that, and you just want to go there. I have a little boy that lived down the street, and man, he got into trains. And I'm talking a 2-year-old who was seriously into trains, was reading about trains by 3 independently because that's where his gifts took him. And by 4, he could tell most engineers about trains more than engineers would know about trains. He went so deep in that area and stayed there for almost 4 years. It almost worried his parents because they were so concerned that he just wouldn't get off the train concept. And that's pretty common with people who are going into high expertise levels. I call it the E3 effect. You know, somebody who's been exposed to something like a zoo may enjoy going to see the animals at a zoo. But if they've had exuberance in the area of tracking safari animals in a normal neighborhood zoo, they may go to great lengths to find out about habitat. They may go to great lengths to find out about the food and how the numbers in the wild are affected by the zoo animals that are propagated and brought back to the wild. I mean, there's just 100,000 depths of interest they can go to that would facilitate their mind being used at the level they can use. However, if you're not interested in zoos, that may cause a social problem if that's all the person would talk about. And so to work in a functioning society, we have to learn when the all or nothing turns off, and to have food to eat and shelter to live in and money to earn, we have to learn to manage our time. And sometimes, unless the career aligns with that exuberance, there's some all or nothing issues that come up when we don't find that middle ground. Gail Roddy is with us. She's a playwright. She's a speaker into the lives of many young women as a mentor and a sage with Calling All Women to the Well. Gail, I know you see this all or nothing space from the perspective of perfectionism and being enoughness. Would you share with us about how to find that middle ground and how you encourage people to find that middle ground and to know when it's happening? Dr. Edith alluded to some physical symptoms, and you shared with us in a smaller group what those physical symptoms felt like for you. I would love for you to talk about the things you hear women saying to each other, your teen girls and the college-age women, about this middle ground in their life and the lack of it.
Well, hi, sweetie, and thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here, too, along with Dr. Edith and the rest of the ladies. You know, you brought up an excellent point that I hear all the time in the conversations that I have with women, be they my age, a baby boomer, or whether they be age that they could be my daughter or could be college age as well, is that sometimes the opposite occurs where you are so into a subject, like you mentioned your calligraphy, and you don't talk about it at all because you feel that no one wants to listen to it, you will be boring, you will be this, you will be that. So you go to that all or nothing, that I'm just not even going to go there because this is just nothing that anyone wants to hear. And you can spin in that isolation. So when I'm with women, I try to encourage them to talk about those interests, which brings them to the point where they realize, oh, I'm not the only one that goes to that all or nothing, either talking about it forever or not talking about it at all. And once that comes out, once that awareness that here is a space where I can talk about it and I won't be judged, I'm no different than anyone else, because we all are. We're all struggling with these issues to one degree or another. No one is exempt. I'll look at other women and I'll think, boy, she certainly has it all together. And then I sit down with coffee with her, and I find out that the truth comes out is that, no, she's struggling too with many of the issues I am. So that brings us, it seems to bring us to a point where, okay, there is another choice, as Dr. Edith said. I can start looking at, perhaps I can find places where I can talk about my calligraphy. And then in other spaces, I don't have to. That keeps you from that all or nothing. You have a middle space. And then that just seems to turn many a psyche into something that is energetic, enlivened, and peaceful.
I love that. Because, Gail, part of it is just not being isolated. You know, calling all women to the well is so powerful to me because it shares the stories of multitudes of women in multitudes of ages, and the stories often repeat. We learn quickly that, you know, this happened in somebody else's life in this way. This happened in her life in another way. And we are enriched by the experience and the shared stories of outcomes, as well as knowing when you're emerging into it. You remember when children were little and you think they'll never sleep through the night, and then someone at church or someone in the grocery store remembers, oh, you're going to love these days. They're going to go by so fast. And you're looking at her like, you're crazy. I can't even survive. But just knowing she did, and knowing that it does pass, and having a different perspective or maybe a tip or two along the way, it's such a welcome relief. You know, so many gifted women do end up in isolation, and it's multitudes of reasons. One, they may not have someone around them by the nature of being a high gifted woman. You know, you're talking about the top 5%, 1% of women thinkers. And so in that space, there's just not going to be a lot of them. 95% of the world's not going to be you. And that's a reality, and particularly for someone who may be a scientist. I work in a place where NASA scientists are close to us, and I have friendships with people who are the only woman in their field, or there's maybe 6 of them worldwide. I remember when I got a master's degree in gifted education in the area of twice giftedness with behavior disordered kids. There were only 6 of us who specialized that in the whole United States. That's a different kind of isolation. And so to also recognize that, you know, that personal self-care says you find that tribe, you find that group of 6 that you can have a conversation with. I know the first time I went to the National Association of Gifted Children as a teacher, way back in 1980, I felt like I'd arrived home. Those people got me. They understood who I was. They were teachers and administrators and gifted women in their own spaces. It was just like finding people who were exactly like me all in the same room. And we all need that experience of knowing where the middle ground is, that we can just be ourselves. Because sometimes that all or nothing is to do because they can't. You can't share at an expert level with the beginner. And sometimes it's that you're a beginner from an expert level of thinking, and you need someone who can walk you through with intelligence in a place you're ignorant. You know, ignorance is just not knowing. That's not about ability. But boy, so many times gifted women may be high abilitied and high experienced in one area and completely holistically ignorant in another, but they want to be taught from an intelligent standpoint. And that becomes such an important part of adulthood too, because you'll learn where you're comfortable. You know, sometimes you're comfortable in arranging those all or nothing places because you're saying, hey, I know nothing about that. And that may challenge me feeling like I'm really dumb. I'm not dumb. I'm just ignorant of that space. So I need to find a space that teaches me the way I learn. That's another way to combat all or nothingness. You know, what's between our ears and what we think about ourselves has a big trigger to do with this all or nothing thinking. I would love Miss Bobby, who works with children of all ages in ministry and also leads many creative endeavors at the local university, to talk about how all or nothingness shows up in her life. Miss Bobby's with us today. She's got a pretty significant cough, but I think she's ready to go.
Good morning, sweetie, and everyone else. I actually have come from 2 perspectives. I have been one of those all-or-nothing thinkers for a very long time, and I started college back in 2008 as a non-traditional student, and I would just totally freak out every time I had an assignment due. I kept saying, oh, I can't do this because I can't do it perfectly. And if I can't do it perfectly, then why should I do it? And if you don't do it, you get a 0. But if you do it at the level that you think is right, it may not be the correct level. And what I learned when I first started in college was that doing my best is good enough. And so I learned very quickly that it's a matter of figuring out what the instructor wants and doing my best at what they want, not at the level that I think my perfectionism is. Then on the flip side, when I started teaching at the college, I found out that I wasn't the only one that thought that. I would teach a class on PowerPoint, and they'd be like, I can't do it because it's not good enough. And I finally realized that my thinking when I was trying to write papers was, I need to write at the level of my college professor. Even though I'm just beginning college, I should already be at that level. It wasn't until I turned around and started teaching that I realized that's what the people that were in my class were thinking, was that they needed to create the beautiful PowerPoint that I did because I was teaching them that. So they thought that that was what I expected of them. That was when I really got a good grasp on the all or nothing thinking. It's not about doing it perfectly the first time you do it, like Dr. Edith said. It's about doing the very best you can for your level. And that's that middle ground, is we have to understand where our gifts and talents are and where we can break out the, all knowing about calligraphy because we've studied it for years, or in my case, everything about computers, or when it's a time when, okay, this is the first time I've been exposed to this, and my good enough really is good enough.
Oh, I love that answer, Bobby. I love the way you transitioned through, because I remember when every single expectation of college, you projected to be a life or death situation. And it was just from not having exposure to it. You were one of the first that went to college in your family, and so to not have exposure to what expectations are can lead us to project all kinds of fear and anxiety into that space. One of the things I like to say is excellence comes with experience. The Women of Dear Whimsy this week have been working in a private group on some of our own skills, and it's so fun to see us evolve that space in this closed, contained space, because you see the fear, you see the anxiety, you see the excitement, you see exuberance about new skills, but you also see very quickly that each of the people in that exercise have been improving because of experience. Excellence just doesn't happen without experience. And so many things are thwarted if we get stuck on that I have to do it perfectly or I won't do it at all, because you can't get to excellence without experience. The very act of doing steps moves progress of knowing what steps to do next. Either what you did worked, or what you did worked as ineffectively as you wanted it to, and so doing more of the same would still probably be ineffective. But as you do more of the same with knowledge, with experience, those dots start beginning to connect. We see it in each other's videos, and we see it in each other's conversations, that just watching somebody else with poor lighting lets you know that needs to be fixed. We know that we see the growth in just 5 days of doing this challenge we're all doing. As we watch each other, we syncopatedly learn. Our brains are built that way. When you start to throw a ball, you don't say, oh, I'm going to target this for my eyes, my elbow's going to bend a little more, and it's going to eventually hit that man's glove, and I'm going to connect the ball to the glove. No, your body, your brain is designed to track and improve as it goes. Unless there's been a brain injury, you automatically zero in with experience what you're attempting to do. And so many times that middle ground is recognizing, hey, I'm a beginner at this. Hey, I'm ready to go from beginner to intermediate. Hey, I'm ready to take my intermediate skills in this area a little further. Because just identifying the goal can sometimes stop that all or nothing thinking. The goal isn't to be the professor this week, as Bobby said in her class. The goal is to learn to write a paper that can be submitted to a professor who's already trained in that area. And not doing those projections to the all or nothing death stage. Man, I like to think about the Star Wars planet ship, and it's a Death Star, that if I go to that place of what's the worst case scenario that can happen, I can go there every time, because there's fear in my heart, and I can have to really identify, hey, this isn't something to be fearful of, this is something to be aware of. Lucy, I know that you know a whole lot about middle ground, because in your biblical counseling as well as in the work that you do with individual self-esteem, man, this has a lot to do with how people view themselves and taking the risk to do something new or different, or to be seen as themselves or known as themselves. How does that work in your world?
Well, all or nothing thinking affects everyone all the time. Of course, there's some middle grounders, and I learned a while ago, probably 20 years ago, when I was going through something, real tough in my life, and I was in counseling, and then while I was in counseling, my mom, sadly, at that time, she passed away, and I learned that I was an all or nothing thinker at that time, that I thought that I had to have it all together. And the people I work with as my counselees, sometimes they too think that they have to have it all together. And what I learned for myself is not so much that I need to do it right. I didn't need to embrace performance. What I needed to embrace was my true identity. And my true identity is a child of God. For others, they find their place to embrace. And in embracing your true self, who you truly are, that frees you from performance living. When you free yourself from performance living, that I have to do this way or that way or whichever way, then you become free of all or nothing thinking, because it's not about who you are, it's about who you are. It's not about what you do. It's not performance, it's about your identity, your true identity. And when you embrace that, like I said, then that frees you. And when you are then free, you can then live a victorious life as you are led to lead in whatever area that you are working in, whether that be in the schools, in your work world, in your family. And that was something I had to learn. I had to learn to let go of that, and that's something I work with my counselees. Some of them are stuck in that, and they've got to learn their true identity and not be hung up on their performance.
I love that, because you know it is the P's. It's always, as a coach and as an educator, to me, important to identify to the person in front of me, are we talking about your personal skills? And we're talking skills and actions, gang. We're not talking about the person themselves, because every human is of great value. However, they may have to define a skill area in their personal skills, in their process skills, in their performance skills, or in the way that they produce products may need to be learned or adjusted. You know, there's a very big difference between saying you are something and saying the way you do something is needy or excellent or in between, whatever it is. And that's something that we often forget when we're talking to people, that we're not talking about the sense of honor or the sense of respect, the sense of personhood the human is, versus whatever the topic is that day. It may be the process of how they do digital things online. It may be the process of how they prepare for something they're going to do, or the product that they produce as an art form. Those are very different evaluations than saying the person's not that because they do those things, or the person is that because they do those things. That always runs into two personal looks and effects. We are evaluative often and given credit or non-credit based on our physical persona. I have people who are model beautiful, and I have people who are outside physically struggling to figure out how to get their look together. And it's not about that compared to who they are as a human, because they're all gorgeous as humans. The people that I get to know, each of them are unique. Each of them have their own gifts and talents. And there's not an all or nothing in any area of their life. But sometimes we label ourselves or we label others in an all or nothing physical, visual assembly, and we make assumptions about ourselves, and sometimes we make assumptions, unfortunately, about others that are based on nothing but habit. You know, that whole stereotype that someone who is larger is lazy, someone who is skinny is energetic. Those are stereotypes that if we're not careful, we can go into this all or nothing thinking. Not every woman who is large is lazy. Not every person who is skinny is athletic. We have these perceived perceptions that we need to get rid of, that we need to at least identify and put on the table, because that also affects how we see ourselves. If it's always a comparison analysis, if it's always about, you know, perfection, if it's always about preconceived concepts of what something is instead of exploring and exposing yourself to more education, that all or nothing thinking is much harder to get to the middle ground. You know, one of the most beautiful things I see among gifted women when they're conversing is the conversation of middle ground, of how they survive the trips and the tips and the triggers in their own life to be productive, peaceful, joyful living lives. That's the goal here. We want to release, relax, and restore ourselves into a place that we can enjoy our gifts for ourselves and for others. Dr. Edith, in that place of trying to emerge, of trying to say, oh man, I do that. How, you know, talk to me about what that looks like. When we're talking about people who are living in that black, white, all or nothing world, how does it show up in their career life, in their home life, or in their educational life when it's going sour? What does that look like?
Well, Thanks, sweetie. Hey, when things are going sour, we usually see, now we're using labels because that's the way we communicate situations.
Yeah,
So,
identified
with,
actions. Yeah.
yeah, we're looking at high anxiety. We're looking at maybe from manic to depressive. We can look at severe depression. These things come in because we don't have an understanding of what's going on. We don't understand that we have options. We don't understand that the intensity of our experience is part of who we are. And so to acknowledge that and then be able to gain ways to be able to express ourselves and interact in life by choice. And also recognizing when we've reached that point of peace I've heard us talk about this morning. Flow is another type of thing where you just really feel it good, where you recognize that everything is coming together. And yet if you really look at that moment, it's a moment that has balance to it. It's a moment that is in that middle ground. It's not at the extreme. The intensity of the moment is still there, but it is an intensity of connectedness, calm, peace. And so in that sense, knowing that point and knowing you can return to that point is one of the biggest tools that I like to give people because of the extreme experience we have. And each extreme experience for the gifted, high ability, multi-talented individual is very, very intense. So it looks like they're totally out of balance, totally out of control, and yet that's not a reality. And we need to understand that as individuals, recognize it, and be able to return to our moment of peace.
Love that. We have Maddie Getty with us this morning. She's joining our Women of Dear Whimsy as one of our team members. And Maddie's a college girl, and she's a high gifted girl in the area of art and expression and writing. And yet she also has some learning disabilities like dyslexia. And she's had to really understand how to fit in a rural area and a city area with her exuberance for the things she does, like art and creating and her entrepreneurism. Maddie, I'm so glad you're with us today. Go ahead and make sure that you're showing up on the screen. And I'd love for you to talk to us about how all or nothing works with you, because in your social world, and you're working with the college kids and church kids and university people, you have to change roles a lot in that all or nothing, how to express the things you're into, because you're really into art and you are a young artist and you actually own your own business and have your own brand, Maddiology. So how does this all or nothing affect you when you make choices for socialization with the college kids and with other adults that you work with in contracts and such?
For me personally, I'm still working this one out.
I think we all are.
I'm a very calm person for the most part, so it took me a while to understand I was actually being perfectionistic about things. But for me, it's really about learning to balance what's okay and how do I handle transitioning, talking to people just in normal conversations, because it is very easy for me to get very, very specific and very specialized in one area very quickly.
I
So
love the fact that you have this label that I want to share that's called a talkative introvert. And you've told us that you're a talkative introvert, that when you're nervous that you talk like you are an extrovert and people don't even see where it's coming from because you're usually so quiet when you're out and about. But I love that term because it's been one I've been able to use in classrooms, because we overtalk our subjects of comfort when we're uncomfortable in a group. And then later it's like, oh, why couldn't I be quiet? You're so good at bringing people into the conversation, but you've been just a wonderful addition to my vocabulary by talking to me about what that looks like for you and to express to some of the kids that we work with how that works. Madison, it is so good to have you with us. Can you share one more thing about what are the physical things? I think you're an expert at identifying touch, texture, physical symptoms that you're going through that tell you that you're at alarm stage. Talk to me about how you figure that out and why that matters to you.
well, for me personally, when I'm really starting to get to the out of bounds place, I'll find just little things to bother me. Like if I have on a scratchy shirt, I'll just pick it to death. Or a good indicator for me if I'm getting to that place where I'm just worried or scared about something is, sadly but truly, my stomach almost always will start going on the fritz. But I think a lot of it is finding out what makes you comfortable and then learning to bring yourself back to your comfort spot. Like for me, if I'm having something where I'm really stressing out about something, which isn't very often but does happen, I'll almost always go read or draw and just take some time out to cool down a little bit and then go back to the problem. And then I can have time to think it out and figure out what's going on.
Well, those are excellent suggestions because just a change of scenery, even walking through a house or through a schoolroom to a different place can so often give us tremendous relief and a chance to think differently about something we immediately said, "Oh, I can't do that," or "Yes, I can do that." Just that space to breathe and to recenter is so important. I hope that you'll all look for ways to find middle ground. On Thursday, at the blog post at darewhimsy.com, you'll find all of our participants today have written a sister post, a place where they're giving their best hints on how they use middle ground in their life, how they inject it into spaces when they feel like they're in an all-or-nothing situation. All of our writers have their own blogs or businesses in other places. None of us are gurus here. We come together as women united to help learn to release, relax, and restore our lives together into a happy place and create a life we love. We hope that you'll leave comments, that you will share with us your tips and tricks, and sometimes be on the show with us. We have guests and we have processes starting in September. If you'd like to be a guest on our show and you'd like to share the information you have for gifted and creative women, we'd be interested in hearing from you. My name is Sweetie Berry. These have been the Women at Dear Whimsy. We're going to do a quick popcorn with one last tip. And I would like to say that my middle ground is music. Boy, if I can put music in the background on those days where it's all or nothing, it kind of puts me in a different place to relax into the learning or relax into the stress of the situation so that I can think to the middle ground better. So music is my tip and trigger to get there. What do you use, Dr. Edith, personally?
Personally, I use reading, nonfiction, because I'm totally intense into the reading fiction, because I totally get into the nonfiction, and crocheting is another form, so that my repetitiveness and calming.
Excellent. Lucy, how are you today?
I'm great. My place I go to it's a place called PJ's with my husband, and we just end up talking about whatever's on our minds, and it's relaxing, and it's a great middle ground.
Oh, I love it. A change of scenery and a place to talk it out is a great way to go. Miss Bobby, where's your middle ground tip?
My middle ground, I have two. Water is one thing that really calms me. And where I live right now, there's a pond. I can look just right over the top of the computer screen and see it. And just getting around water, I have fountains in the house. Anything to do with water will calm me. And then, like Dr. Edith said, I do sewing. I will do quilting by hand, and just the intricacy of doing that sewing is enough to just my entire body will relax and my head will clear.
Great. Gail, where is your middle ground?
I would have to say mine is to take a walk out in nature where I can see the greenery and feel the air on me and see other people moving about so that I see that life is going on and it's not just about me. But it's interesting, Bobby and Dr. Edith, I'm the same way, to knit where I get the repetitiveness, but it's also very relaxing, and it just shows one man's meat is another man's poison, because my mother says that repetitiveness just about drives her crazy. So we're all different in that, but that's my space.
Absolutely. And Maddie, if you would finish us up with your tip, and then we're going to say goodbye at the end of the show.
For me personally, it's going outside like Miss Gail, or I'll spend time with my dog, or pen and paper, just sitting down, sketching out ideas and books, and just taking time to relax and be.
Great. Finding that middle ground is a form of self-care, and I hope that you'll take some time to explore it. It's the middle of the year. A lot of people are in the space of having a lot of new stresses, mid-year startups, back-to-school times for others. For others, they're finishing moves and changing careers. It's a great place to explore the middle ground. I hope that you'll join us next week. Be sure to visit darewhimsy.com tomorrow to hear the rest of the conversation. We look forward to being with you next Wednesday. Thanks for coming.